let's start by talking about the Texas Senate primaries. They're coming up in a little less than a month, and we have some really interesting races going on both sides. So, Mark, can you set us up? What's going on? What are we seeing in the polling right now?
Yeah, well, this is the first, and maybe Michael has a different example. I don't think I've ever seen a state like this with two very contested primaries on both sides where it's really still a toss-up a month before. And again, in a state that is generally thought of as a red state, I think people have talked about becoming purple, but it's still clearly pretty red. So, on the Democratic side, you have kind of two pretty popular politicians on the left. James Talarico, who's a state legislature, and then Jasmine Crockett, who's a U.S. representative, who's gotten a lot of national press recently. And then on the right, you have kind of an interesting, combination. We have John Cornyn, who's been there seemingly forever. You have Ken Paxton, who was, charged with crimes and they turned out maybe not to be true. And people are going there. And you have Wesley Hunt, who's kind of this upstart, kind of, very far right, trying to take the farthest right section of the electorate. So it's a really interesting race. And there's a lot of storylines behind this where the polling is actually really, really not matching kind of what you're seeing in the betting markets. And this is one where me and Michael have talked about, a lot of times we talk about herding, right? Where these polls all look similar to the same, that they will wait it because they said they don't want to go out on a limb. But I will tell you what, Emerson has gone out on a limb when it comes to the Democratic primary, where they show James Talarico up double digits. The other four polls all show Jasmine Crockett winning. So this is going to be one where, and Emerson is clearly, in my opinion, the most legitimate pollster who's done the race. So that's one. And the right is kind of interesting because you kind of have this anti, it's not necessarily kind of the pro-Trump section of voting, and they don't like John Cornyn, but they have two choices in Wesley Hunt, and Paxton, who's the favorite. So it's really interesting to see how they will take votes away from each other. And the Democratic primary is getting really, really nasty online. And there's a lot of, there's some racial things going on with the Democratic primary. There's a lot of people saying that Jasmine Crockett can't win a general, but Talarico can. So it's just been really interesting to watch. I have a lot of thoughts about it.
Well, to respond to Mark, I think races like this do happen. I think this might be the first time it's happened in the Trump era, and so it takes on a different hue to it, and the interest that people have with regards to the race, and that's the interesting thing, right? Like, Trump isn't on the ballot, but still that's going to be a big issue with this particular race. The other thing I would say is, just to hammer home what Mark was saying, is in a lot of those polls that show Crockett winning, she's barely winning, right? Like, it's not and I would say the bigger thing to take away from that is people just saying, oh, the race is close. It's they're a 1 or 2 point difference, and that's a easy position to take, to just say, oh, it's divided. We don't really know who's going to win. And we'll see how things shake out over the next 6 weeks or so.
Yeah, you guys both touched on this, but a lot of the polls have that neck and neck super close on, honestly, both sides to an extent. And then we have Emerson coming out and being that outlier, saying Talarico is almost 10 points ahead. But when we're looking at all these different candidates with lots of different storylines, lots of headlines for really everyone, who do you see as actually electable on both sides? How do you see electability coming into play?
Well, I can tell
I
you
think
what.
that is a tough one in this particular case, because I feel like at the end of the day, the matchups matter. And then something that I don't have experience with is a 3-month runoff. Usually in different campaigns, places where I've been, runoffs take place in 2 weeks or a month. And I think that'll be very interesting to see what happens in these runoffs, where the two candidates really go at it and beat each other up, and in many ways reduce their electability to the overall general election population. Now, I think, of course, both candidates that are more extreme, I think will have a harder time in a general election. It will bring things more into the middle, and that provides an opportunity for a more middle of the road candidate. I think that's just how it would go.
So what's interesting is I actually disagree with Michael. I think it's very obvious who the best candidates on this race are. I think when you talk about electability on the right, it's clearly Cornyn, which I mean, basically Michael said that's somehow, the more moderate, I guess, based on who's doing that, or at least maybe more normal in people's mind where it's not, I'm going to do everything Trump wants. It's like, I'll do 90% of things Trump wants. So that's, for in the Republican primary, that's somebody who's independent, I guess. But on the left, what's interesting is that the general consensus Talarico is the more electable candidate in the general election. But at the same time, he's actually also probably more liberal than Crockett. If you look now, maybe his, the way he talks about things is not, where Crockett's more of, a firecracker, somebody who's fighting for that. That Talarico actually has voted more to the left of where Crockett is. So that's an interesting thing where somebody's coming off as more moderate in what they say, but the other person, actually is more moderate. So it'll be interesting what that happens. But the same thing that Michael said about the runoff, I think is going to be problematic for the Democrats in this primary. They are starting to really go at each other. And if there is this, again, I've seen a lot on Twitter and I've seen a lot from the, maybe not officially the Crockett campaign, but Crockett spokespeople making it a lot about race. Where if this comes down to Talarico wins the primary, and I think I saw the votes, I think about 65-70% of black voters are going to vote for Crockett in the primary. That could be a real issue if they really go down this hole and they say, oh, Talarico is, his campaign is racist or something like that. And then you have, potentially black voters saying, well, I don't know, I might sit home when it comes to the actual election. I may not vote for him over, John Cornyn. Now, Ken Paxton is a lot more of a firebrand where you might get Democrats who are not super happy going to vote against him. But my opinion is that it's clearly both sides know what they want, and the betting markets kind of show that, it is right now Talarico and Paxton are the clear favorites in these races, despite what the polls say.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really interesting point, I think, about race, and then you also have the factor in Texas of there's not just like black voters, there's Latino voters, plus the like urban rural differences in Texas. And I think a lot of that is why people are saying, oh, okay, we might see Texas leaning a little bit more purple moving forward. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics in that sense too. I kind of want to go quickly back to the Republican primary and talk about one of the polls we were looking at where in the head-to-heads we see Hunt doing really well compared to Paxton and Cornyn. And you guys both were saying that Cornyn is this kind of clear moderate. He's been there he's a long time incumbent. Do you see a situation where Hunt is sort of pushing him out? Could we see a runoff where Cornyn, the incumbent, is pushed out? Do you think that's likely? What is, I guess, the strategy there with Hunt being this like third candidate?
I think it's probably unlikely that he'll be able to receive enough votes to just push Cornyn out of a runoff. But it's possible. It's happened. But I think it's just a difficult hill to climb. It would be easier if there was somebody else in the race who was like Cornyn. If there was a fourth person, then I would see that as a real possibility.
Yeah.
So I will say there's no way that it's Hunt and Paxton in a row. There's a 0% chance it happens. There's no way because they're taking for the same.
That's
voting.
a hot take. 0% chance. You guys can take that to the betting market.
That's right. Yeah, I'll say 0.1. I know nothing's a 0% chance, but they're taking from the same voter base. It doesn't make sense. And honestly, this is one where Paxton is probably a 95% favorite if Hunt never got into the race. So he got in and, I think he kind of got in as a spoiler, it seemed like, but he's actually gaining some traction where he can get up to, I've seen 15, 20%. And like you said, people who don't like Cornyn still like Hunt, even if they prefer Paxton. People who don't like Paxton still like Hunt, okay, even if they prefer Cornyn. So like you said, he's doing the best, but I do think that he will not be I think he's a little bit too far right to be a great general election candidate.
Okay. Another thing that I've seen in this race is it's being brought on a national stage a lot more than I think certain state races are. But we've seen Talarico with a Super Bowl ad. We've seen a lot of, spokespeople in Jasmine Crockett's campaign. She's obviously a U.S. representative. So we're seeing a lot of things on the Democrat side specifically, but also kind of broadly in this race being brought into the national stage. What do you think about that, Michael?
Well, I mean, that's what's happening to this race is it's becoming the late, because this isn't the first, and nor will be the last
Yeah.
race that is being brought to a national level of like, okay, what is it going to say about how people do in this race? And especially with a place like Texas, which is on the border, and those are the types of issues that the Trump administration is caring about. So this is definitely going to flare up those tensions, and it's going to be a part of the entire race, and to see what happens. And I think at the end of the day, people want to see what's going to happen in Texas, which I think Texas is a little deceiving, because if you actually look at the modeling and the registration numbers, it is a lot more Democrat than most people realize. And that's why I look back to, Beto in 2018, where showing that, yeah, this state can be very divided. It's just more that Democrats don't turn out because they don't think that they can win. But the more they think that it's possible, the more they might turn out.
But
Yeah.
so to that point, I have a question because everything you're saying makes sense. But I feel like Texas keeps saying, "Oh, Beto almost won. That's why you could almost be a purple state." It's like, well, look, there's a Republican governor of Vermont. That doesn't make it a purple state. There's a Republican governor of Massachusetts. I feel like they're sticking to this one race that they didn't even win. They're talking about how they're a purple state, and then meanwhile, pretty much every race since then has been Republican +8, +9, +10. I actually don't really buy the purple state status. We're even getting there. I know what the registration looks like, but look at what the registration looks like in West Virginia, where more Democrats are like. I just think that the Democrats are maybe different in Texas, where they don't vote down the straight Democratic line. I don't know if you have thoughts or numbers on this, but I just don't buy the purple state argument. I think this is what Republicans try to do with Minnesota. It's what, and it just isn't there yet. And they want it to be true. There's so many electoral votes, but I just don't think it's that close.
I guess because I engage at state capitals directly. I guess I would actually argue that most states are purple. That people are not, it's not as clear cut as people like to think. National politics is what makes people think that there's some kind of division. But I would actually argue that most states are purple. And that when it comes down to the issues they're deciding and what they actually do, there's much more working together, consensus, or going back and forth, and the state might lean one way on one issue and then another way on a different issue. I think that there's a lot more gray, and so I would just disagree wholeheartedly, and that's because I think the average person does not view themselves as a Republican or a Democrat in terms of the way their identity.
I think that's fair. I think we have to define what we mean by purple states, right? Because it's really in my opinion, it's like, can somebody from the other party win an election on any given year and it's not a shock? And that's kind of how I define it. So the way you're talking about it also is true. I just think I'm talking about electorally. If you haven't elected if you haven't elected a Republican for statewide office in 30 years, I don't think you're a purple state. And that's kind of where you're at with Texas. So I get what you're saying.
I guess I wasn't commenting on if Texas is a purple state. I was just commenting on the possibility of a Democrat winning statewide. And so I can't speak for what other people say, but do I think Texas is all of a sudden going to become a battleground state for the next 30 years? No, I don't think that. I'm just saying that it is possible that a Democrat could win coming up here soon. Just like it started happening in Georgia, or there's other states where all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, we didn't think a Democrat could win here, and now and vice versa, and all of a sudden it's like so it's more in that sense, and what the trends are over the next 20, 30 years are what actually determine whether a state stays purple or not.
And what's interesting is the 2030 census too, is because they're going to be changing, where Democrats have to win more than just the blue wall if the, predictions of what it's going to look like, where you're adding, an electoral college vote in mostly red states. And what you said, Michael, is like Democrats might actually have to go after Texas at some point because they don't have that blue wall. So like the question is that a good investment, or are there better states?
So you heard it here. Mark is saying if you're a Democrat, move to Texas because that's important for winning national elections in the long run.
And there's a lot of people doing that. A lot of people coming
I
from California, coming from New York. Yeah, you see a lot of that in Texas these
Yeah,
days.
they need to divide up where they live. They can't all live in California, Illinois, New York. They've got to move. They've got to move to other states.
Well, the Texas cities are growing, that's for sure. So, kind of going back to what Mark was saying about what makes a purple state, would you guys be shocked if we saw Crockett or Talarico win here? You're saying like, okay, if, would you not be shocked? That's kind of what makes it a purple state. What do you think about in this race and what's going on here? Would you guys be shocked if that were to happen?
Because it's an off year, I would not be shocked if it was a if it was there was a national election. I don't think it would be possible. But because this race will be the number one thing turning people out, and there is enough numbers there to make it work, it is possible.
Okay.
I actually agree. I would not be shocked based on what is happening in the national political environment, which is very kind of anti-Republican, anti-Trump right now. I think either of them could win. I think Talarico has a much better chance though.
Okay. And going with this kind of like anti-Trump mentality, Trump has not endorsed anyone on the Republican side of this race. Do you see that coming soon? If he does, what happens? Will it resolve it? Will it make it messier? I kind of know what I think, but I'm curious what you guys would say on that.
Pandemonium, I think. I think it would just cause a lot of problems, and I don't know that I'd want it right now. I think it just you have to build a coalition, and if you're trying to win 50+1, I'm not sure that works. And even if you're not the Trump guy and then Trump endorses you, then what does that do to your base? Do they then are like, well, why am I voting for this guy if Trump? I don't know. It sounds very messy to me.
I feel like one way is messy, the other one ends the race. If he endorses Paxton, the primary's over. Paxton wins. I don't think it's close. If he endorses Wesley
Paxton,
Hunt,
that's it, I guess.
and he could endorse Hunt,
That's kind of true because he is winning already, and that would just solidify who he is.
but
Paxton's a candidate that has come in with a lot of baggage. We've seen these scandals, all these headlines with what's gone on with him. Do you think he's past that? Is that still going to be impacting his race moving forward, Michael?
It's funny, right? I think of it like I feel like none of us talk about House of Cards being like a political thriller anymore, and so I even think about scandals and issues and whatever, and I think a lot of people are desensitized to a lot of that. I don't think it really does as much as it used to. The things that might have ended someone's political career 20 years ago now can be overcome. So I don't think it's that big of an issue.
Yeah.
it feels like Trump has shown that. I think Trump's kind of the one who, like, he got away with a lot of things that would have been a game changer and ended people's careers. And he kind of leaned in and didn't apologize, which I think to some extent Republicans have tried to use that as a, kind of the anti-Romney who apologized for saying something like binders full of women when he's just saying all he wants is women in his administration. He apologized for that. Meanwhile, Trump just says whatever he wants and doesn't apologize for anything. So it's interesting how that works. And obviously Trump has been more successful running national elections than Mitt Romney has.
That's true. All right. Do you guys have any final thoughts on the Texas race before we move on?
I got one. Just watch out for Wesley Hunt. I think he's the one who is the one who changes selection. I think if he gets over 20%, Cornyn is your candidate. I think if he gets under 20, it's going to be Paxton.
All right. Very interesting. Michael, anything before we go?
I just think that from the beginning of the runoff till the end of the runoff, a lot can happen. I mean, that's just a long time.
Very long time until November for sure.